Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Lowe from the AWS IoT Partner Acceleration Team, and I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar with AWS partner TensorIoT on achieving greater situational awareness, gaining actionable insight, and making more confident decisions. Today, I'm here with John Trainer, Vice President and General Manager at TensorIoT. John, thank you very much for joining us today. I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Great, Amanda. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it really is a pleasure to be able to speak with everyone today about how they can achieve greater situational awareness, gain actionable insight, and make more confident decisions. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about technology for sure, and we're going to do a demonstration as well. But I think most importantly is to relate that technology to how manufacturers, food processors, other industrial companies can really apply the technology and use it in ways to improve their business operations. Before I jump in with the solution, I always like to start and talk about the types of things that we're able to hear from customers when we speak to them on a regular basis. And, here are some things we sort of collect on Post-it notes in meetings and put together. And I think some of the audience today might recognize some of these things. You may have a sense that you're fairly productive, but not really sure, because some days in many manufacturing operations can be quite chaotic. We also hear customers tell us that they have a lot of older machines, but they are really trying to find ways to make them as productive as possible. In fact, the average age of a machine in a North American plant is about 17 years. And in some parts of the world, it might be even older than that. So thinking about getting data and pulling things together, it's not just dealing with current technology, but sometimes addressing technology that is a couple of decades old or older. Customers also talk about the fact that when they have unexpected downtime in the organization, they don't have the empirical data to understand what should be done differently. It's become very difficult to collect that and then really be able to use it. In fact, I've heard customers say that they think there's probably a lot of unproductive time each shift, but it's really hard to measure with the systems that they have in place today. And then there's customers who have effectively what they think are, good problems to have. They have capacity, they can take on more orders, but because of the way everything runs, overtime costs can be fairly unpredictable. And a lot of that really spans from the fact that people say, we just don't have a real-time view of what's happening on the production floor. It's one thing to be able to have access to data, but then having visibility, it's not just tracking it, it's making sure the right people can get to it. So here's a few more things that I've heard customers talk about. They'll say that they track a lot of things on paper, but sometimes people forget to write things down. And of course, some people have handwriting that's sometimes very hard to understand. Some customers have tried things like machine monitoring and new systems from a number of different vendors in the marketplace. And often they found it was more complicated than they thought. And most importantly, it only worked with some of their newer machines. And again, back to my earlier point about the average age of a machine, a solution that's only going to work with some of the machines or a few of the machines isn't really a solution at all, because it can't give you a complete view of what's going on the production floor. Some customers are ready to make investments, but they're not sure what capacity they actually need. Again, because they have the data, but they haven't been able to bring it together. It's in silos or stovepipes of information. It's hard to compare things. People at a certain point thought ERP systems would really help with things like this, but many customers I've talked to have said, well, the ERP system is good. It certainly helps our finance organization, but a lot of the information we need is out of date when we're looking for it. We have reports about production downtime maybe last week, but it's too late to do anything. We know now we had a problem last Tuesday, but we wanted to be able to take action real time. And one more thing that I'm starting to hear at an increasing frequency from a number of organizations is they're recognizing that as people are retiring out of manufacturing roles, they're not quite sure how best to attract and retain the next generation of workers who have grown up with digital systems, expect everything to be on a tablet or a mobile device, and are actually having a hard time dealing with some of the interfaces and systems that have been in manufacturing and other industrial environments for a long period of time. It was really in an understanding of those challenges that we heard in so many areas of industrial operations from customers that we worked to bring a new approach to the market to really be able to integrate a number of these things together and address what we heard from customers. SmartInsights from TensorIoT is a complete end-to-end solution that enables industrial customers to rapidly connect and derive actionable, operational, and business insights out of the data that they already have. In many cases, we're not collecting and creating new data, but we're bringing it together and assembling it in a way that previously had not been possible. And we're doing all that based on the power of AWS. We'll get into a demo shortly, but just to give you a preview, SmartInsights brings together a number of different things in a very easy to use approach. So first of all, getting information about last Tuesday isn't useful unless you're trying to do historical analysis. So SmartInsights provides live analysis, actionable insight at the right level of detail. If you're a plant manager, you may have one view. If you're a production worker, you may have another view. If you're an executive who wants to look at information across multiple plants, you would have yet another view. And you can filter and look at that data in a number of different ways, from right down to what's happening second by second or moment by moment at the plant level, to much higher, larger time scales. What has happened in the last 30 days or the last 90 days? And if I get curious about something, having the ability to then quickly drill in and do some queries on my own. So it's not just a series of canned reports or visualizations that I'm looking at. SmartInsights brings together information that goes from the level of the asset or the machine up to a assembly line or production area to an entire site, up to an entire global organization, regardless of location. And being able to compare information across sites makes it much easier to make good business decisions moving forward. Here's the architecture of SmartInsights. And the advantage for customers using SmartInsights is that a number of different AWS services are orchestrated together, and then everything is presented with a single pane of glass, from managing gateways to seeing production data to understanding what's going on in the business overall. Starting on the left-hand side on the production floor, I mentioned connecting to data via OPC UA servers. Of course, that can be done, but for older legacy equipment, adding sensors or getting readings that are not available from machines, and interfacing with PLCs to get real-time data from the floor together via on a device running AWS IoT Greengrass, which is the edge gateway, which then sends information up to AWS IoT Sitewise, and then is funneled into a number of different services so that we can visualize and analyze that data. One advantage of an approach that we've taken at TensorIoT with the SmartInsights product is that we haven't needed to reinvent the wheel. So as additional AWS services are introduced, for example, the recently introduced Lookout for Equipment, we can integrate that new source of information as well for things like anomaly detection, so we can see real-time equipment notifications all within SmartInsights, so something that's very familiar for users where SmartInsights has already been deployed. So it's a very extensible platform that can be added to over time. One of the things that we've certainly seen in industrial IoT implementations is that it's important to not end up in a scenario where you do a proof of concept. It's a term I don't even really like, and then not know where to go from there. At TensorIoT, working together with AWS and industrial customers, we're very focused on implementing something that is going to create business value and is going to be able to deliver that in just a matter of weeks. Instead of trying to boil the ocean and do everything all at once, we take what we call a crawl, walk, run type of approach. So getting started, which is something that we strive to complete in a matter of days, certainly no more than 4 weeks, is to work with customers to select an assembly line, a particular manufacturing cell or cluster of equipment for an initial deployment. We want to prove that this is going to work, and we don't necessarily need to do an entire plant to be able to see the value of this. So customers by themselves or together with our own people can onboard and connect assets using the existing data feeds they have. And as I mentioned before, adding sensors to legacy equipment as needed. As soon as that information is connected and data is being fed into the cloud, we can see real-time operational data and asset utilization immediately. And from there, we can enable alerts and reporting to see changes to performance over time. And all of that can be done immediately. And in fact, we've seen customers who, just by getting a better view of what's running and what's not running in a particular area of the plant, have been able to immediately look at ways to improve asset utilization. Once that's done, we can start talking about kind of walking into more of a single site adoption. So within that initial facility, having sure that data is collected from all of the assets and all the different device types. And if there are any customizations or if there's a plan for a larger multi-site deployment, we can start looking at asset models and how to make sure that information will be comparable from site to site. And then really put that multi-site hierarchy together with a number of different aggregate views. After that single site is deployed, and again, this is something that happens in a matter of weeks, certainly within a couple of months, we can look at going from crawl to walk and then to run. So, beyond, and again, depending on how many sites there are, this will be a process that happens over time, but many sites can be deployed in parallel. We'd start to do that, and in concert with that, look at machine learning, AI, other solutions that would help generate even more valuable insights on asset issues or production issues, scheduling, integration with ERP and other systems as appropriate. And as I mentioned before, with the example of Lookout for Equipment, as additional AWS services come online or business needs change over time, we can plug those additional services, but present everything within SmartInsights. So there is truly a unified view of the business and the production environment that goes all the way from single individual assets right up to an entire global view inside an organization. So I started off by talking about some of the challenges that customers describe. Now let me talk about some of the benefits that customers are saying they realize when they are working with SmartInsights. The first and most frequent one is operational efficiency. And that can sometimes be as simple as just gaining broader awareness about the capacity utilization of existing equipment and really understanding that even when machines are running, is that time truly productive? And if not, how can we use that information to improve the manufacturing process? Another area is predictive maintenance. So using machine learning and the AI services from AWS, we can take a number of different data points, understand how that relates to machine failure or breakdown over time, and then be able to optimize maintenance schedules to minimize that, or at least make that a planned downtime so it can fit into a production schedule. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about a company that realized those benefits. Customers also with SmartInsights find ways to start doing process optimization. And so they're be able to eliminate waste, again, because of situational awareness, being able to look at data, realize that something isn't being done efficiently, and optimize those operations. And this can quite often be enhanced or accelerated with the use of machine learning and AI, and be able to give workers at the plant feedback to improve productivity in real time. And finally, just looking at the overall production numbers at even at a higher level at the site or the plant level, being able to use machine learning to analyze current conditions, identify deviations from normal operating behavior, and facilitate corrective action. I recently had a conversation with a customer who was wanting to integrate weather data as well, because a large part of their operations happened outdoors, and weather had a big impact on that. And so they wanted to be able to look at both weather predictions, but also understand in real time when they were experiencing weather, whether it was rainfall or high winds, how that was actually changing the production at their particular site location. So those are the types of things that can be as simple as, can we understand when something's going to fail, to, hey, do we understand that we need to add 12 hours to a schedule for something just because of local weather or other conditions like that. I'm always amazed to see the creativity of customers. And once we get talking about different ways to use the technology and the SmartInsights product to solve real business cases, then we can find sources of information and data and relate that to ML, AI, and other systems in ways that really allow customers to see significant benefits. So let me talk about a particular customer example. So, this is a steel company. They cut steel, they service steel, they have, laser systems, they have, band saws, they have all sorts of different, systems to monitor and manipulate and change and fabricate steel in a variety of different ways. Um, they had been, operating for, nearly a century, over 80 years of history. And so they really understood their business and their operations well, but they were also, because they had been around that long, looking for ways to modernize and improve their operations. And like most customers that I was talking about earlier, they had some equipment that was decades old. And so they really wanted to be able to find a way to gather data from as much of that equipment as possible to improve operations. So this was definitely a situation where we also deployed with the customer a variety of sensor hardware to gather telemetry and be able to send it to the AWS cloud to do analysis there. Uh, of course, oftentimes there's machine that can be, or data rather, that can be taken directly from machines and simplify the process. But we do find in many cases, if you have older equipment, we definitely need to be able to put sensors in place to do that. And so really we were looking for ways to identify, with the customer, can we understand the health of an asset from the information we're getting, and really be able to see anomalous behavior that perhaps a human looking at something couldn't necessarily see. We're not good as humans at understanding data at the time scale of, milliseconds, or sort of spotting things that look only slightly irregular, because we tend to look for repeatable patterns and understand things more at the level of the hour and the shift and the workday. So with this steel company, using SmartInsights technology, we were able to give the stakeholders in that organization at all levels the right visibility into their operational details, and give them immediate notifications when machines needed attention. That was going to significantly, and did, reduce the amount of unplanned downtime and increase their responsiveness to what was actually going on in the business. So after a very successful initial deployment, now that customer is looking to expand that solution to a growing number of locations spread across a very large geographic area. And beyond this, of course, there's an opportunity with this customer and customers in similar situations to go beyond just the visibility into the business and predictive maintenance and better scheduling of maintenance, but to look for other opportunities and other ways to improve data. Again, by gathering that data, having increased situational awareness, really being able to get actionable insight based on the data, often with the assistance of machine learning, and then be able to use that in a way that allows people in the business at all levels, from the production worker on the floor to the controller, maintenance engineer, to the shift supervisor and plant manager, to the executive offices, to make more confident business decisions based on real live data from the organization. Let me now hop into a demo. Now, I'm not going to show any particular customer's information, so this will be anonymized and somewhat randomized data, but it will give you an idea of the types of things that can be done with SmartInsights. So when I first connect to SmartInsights, of course, I log in, and then I'm immediately brought to a view that, at a high level can show me all of the different sites and locations I have in my organization around the world. In fact, you can see here that we've got a location over in Europe, and I've got a couple of locations in the US, and I can, zoom in on those and see exactly where that is, understand, what site that is. So we'll hop into those in a moment. Up here at the top of the screen, you can see that I have 3 sites globally that we just saw on the map. We've also got a number of different asset models. And it's important to be able to model information from machines so that we can compare information from different machines and understand that information when it's put together. And then in this particular demo environment, I've got 18 different assets that I'm collecting information from and analyzing at the moment. So, for example, when I look at models, you can see that I've got some pumps, tanks, lathes, CNC mills, drill presses. You could see all of the information that is collected from each of these. So, for example, I can know on the CNC mill the X, Y, and Z position of the head, and so get lots of information very, very quickly for that. And of course, I can create new models. I can download templates for creating new assets and connecting them quite quickly. And then, in fact, I can see all of the individual assets that I have as well in a scrollable list. And so, I can very quickly, search through the assets. So if I'm looking for something particular, here's a fiber laser that happens to be, I know what site it's at. I know what information I can retrieve from that, and I can download the template for that and modify that over time. So at a very high level, it's easy to get to all of the information that would be used by, for example, AWS's IoT site-wise to connect and be able to manage that data. But let's go in and visit a particular site. So I'm going to, zoom in on the map. Here's a site that's near Springfield, Illinois. I can click on that site and go directly to it. And whenever I visit a site, I'm immediately brought to a site map, which gives me an overview of all of the machines, the floor plan. This could be a 3D view. It could be based on, CAD drawings or other information, whatever works best to visualize data in a particular environment. I can see these sort of points on the floor here, which are fully configured and the user can place, which shows me what equipment and what machines are available at each site. And so we'll have a look at one of those in a moment. I can also look at the the dashboard for a site, and so I can get some quick information about the production information I care most about. If I've got something that is at the end of the line, and what I really want to know is, how much production was completed each day, and see that compared to a threshold that I've put together, I can set that up. I can see whether or not, things are running, not running in a certain state, and I can look at that over any period of time. In fact, if I drag across this timeline now, I very quickly will go in and look at data for just those particular dates. And again, at the site level, I can see all of the assets that are available in this particular site, and I could click on any one of them and immediately be brought to a page for that. But let me go back to the site map and show that you can do the same thing by clicking on, say, for example, this pin here for this Haas CNC machine. I immediately can see an image of the asset. It could be a 3D model, and if that's available to me from CAD and other diagrams, I can rotate that and manipulate that. I can see what type of machine this is and where it's located. I can also see all of the properties that are available that I've decided to bring into the system, and there may be, of course, many more beyond this. SmartInsights, like AWS's IoT SiteWise, can support potentially, hundreds or thousands of data points from individual pieces of equipment. And I can also at any point see exactly what the last piece of data here is as well. So it's presented in a table format. I can also create a number of different sort of extra views of that data. So here we've used, again, another visualization tool to be able to show information on this. And as I was showing a moment ago, for any of these, I can drag across a particular time frame, and I can zoom in and see the individual data. And as I zoom in, I get greater and greater resolution. You can see the other parts of the chart and the graph here are changing, but you can just see the level that I can get to and how quickly the system responds to give me, just the level of data I might need to understand what's going on with a particular piece of machinery at a particular point in time. So a lot of flexibility to be able to look at things at really any arbitrary time scale. If I wanted to go back and look at the entire last quarter's production on this machine, I can get that, and notice how quickly we're able to load that in SmartInsights. In addition to creating these types of views, I can get basic charts for every asset that is in the system. And here's an example of where we've also integrated machine learning as well. So here I'm looking at the sort of position of a head. I can add other information as well to the chart, but most importantly, I can see these green lines, these anomalies that we've detected, and the position of the green bar shows you the time at which the anomaly was detected. The height of the bar shows you the confidence interval that this is in some way abnormal operation. And so it's quite possible then to be able to, zoom in on a particular time area and, see this sort of this crossover of these lines happens in a way that wouldn't be associated with normal production, as an example. So I can see all of that information down to the individual asset level and go right into the time scale, where I can see individual data points at as fine a level of detail as I want. In fact, I can also, pan back and forth across a time scale if I really am at a level where I want to understand some operational detail about something. And of course, I can, always zoom back out and see that in the greater context of a wider period of time as well. So a lot of capability right out of the box with SmartInsights. And of course, I can integrate with other tools. For example, we could have these anomalies set off alerts to go into maintenance systems so that we could then analyze and understand whether or not a system was working correctly. So many different ways to be able to use that information. And again, in addition to managing the actual machinery in production, I can also use this information to look at the gateways and the systems that are actually feeding production information as well, and so quickly understand how a particular gateway is working and the health of that, so that I can understand that, and I can have a similar view for really any type of equipment and define visualizations, in a number of different ways. So I can use that to move across sites throughout the world. I can quickly, for example, zoom in my brewery here. Instead of the 3D view we saw before, this is more of a flow layout, and we can see where there are, individual pieces of equipment that I can click into. Again, see a view of that, and look at all of the details and information that I want. And again, I can zoom in on a particular time scale to see individual data points from machines, or go way back out and see a much longer period of time as well. So great flexibility in being able to use the system. So that's a quick overview of SmartInsights from TensorIoT, powered by AWS. So with that, that finishes the formal part of the demonstration. Certainly want to thank everyone for their time and attention, and look forward to following up and engaging with folks who have an interest in seeing smart insights in their particular organization. Thank you.